Such beautiful singing. And I appreciate Andy leading us tonight. Good to see you, friends. If you would, please open the Bible to 1 Samuel chapter 16. 1 Samuel chapter 16. And as you turn there, this is the time when King Saul was ruling over God's people, but he had disobeyed God's command to destroy the Amalekites. And for whatever reason, he decided to do things differently. And so God has rejected him as king and has anointed the young man David to eventually take Saul's place. And it says in 1 Samuel chapter 16 that something happened to this man emotionally. And I begin reading in verse 14 where it says that the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a distressing spirit from the Lord troubled him. And Saul's servant said to him, "Surely a distressing spirit from God is troubling you. Let our master now command your servants who are before you to seek out a man who is a skillful player on the harp. And it shall be that he will play it with his hand when the distressing spirit from God is upon you, and you shall be well." So Saul said to his servants, "Provide me now a man who can play well, and bring him to me." Then one of the servants answered and said, "Look, I have seen a son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite, who is skillful in playing, a mighty man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, and a handsome person, and the Lord is with him." And the text goes on to say that he called for David. And sure enough, it says in the last verse of the chapter, verse 23, "And so it was, whenever the Spirit from God was upon Saul, that David would take a harp and play it with his hand. Then Saul would become refreshed and well, and the distressing spirit would depart from him." A lot of good lessons we can see from that, especially in the providence of God. But I want to zero in on the fact that here's a man who's affected by the sound of music, who's affected by the vibration of music, and how it made a difference for him. And it was enough to help him overcome this distressing spirit that he was facing. And I think that's still relevant for us today, that music is something that makes a difference to us. And of course, it does to God. I read about a young girl who, 5 years old, was hospitalized for cancer in North Dakota. And part of her therapy was to receive music played to her. And one of the therapists said, "Many people have experienced the powerful effect of music on mood without understanding why, but researchers have recently documented a clinical benefit. Music is now being prescribed for cancer patients like this young girl and those suffering from Parkinson's disease, dementia, and trauma." And so we see that. We see that music does affect the soul. Music's important. You take like a wedding, that the bride and the couple, they would spend a lot of time preparing just the right music for the ceremony. You can look at movies and how the soundtrack is just as important, the score is just as important as the movie itself, the story itself, the effects itself. I'm confident that all of us have felt the soothing effect of music. Certain songs can take us back, and take us back to certain memories, and take us back to certain experiences. We all understand that. And then we see, of course, how music was part of what Paul and Silas were doing in a vocal way, of praying to God and singing to Him when they were imprisoned in Acts 16 in Philippi. So the point is, music affects us. Music's a part of our life. And what I want to try and address tonight is to not only show how that's true, music does affect us, but then, of course, to be careful to the type of music we listen to, and then, of course, to make the application of how God wants us to use this in worshiping Him. But we see, just even with Saul, that music does affect us. It does. We can't deny that. Certain songs stimulate certain thought within us, certain feelings within us. I'm sure that you've been to funerals, and Vince Gill's song of Go Rest High on That Mountain has been played. It came out in '94. I've been to a bunch of funerals that this is played, and it just really turns people's emotions on. It's a real stimulating thought of that person departed, and the concept of hope behind it. Well, here's how impressive music is. That when Vince Gill in 2013 sang that song at George Jones' funeral, go look it up if you haven't seen it. It's tremendous. But even he, now here it is almost 20 years after the song was released and it's been played forever, but even he got emotional. Even he couldn't finish the song because of the thoughts it was stirring up within his heart. That's who we are as people. Music affects us. Music generates certain feelings within us because we're spiritual creatures. It enhances our focus. It stimulates the brain. It can improve our performance. I mean, I listen to music all day long when I'm studying or when I'm at the desk. I love it. It really helps. Those of you who work out have certain music you rely on. I don't think you listen to my sermons to work out, do you? It might help you. But you have certain songs that can motivate you to go a little harder and work a little harder in your exercise. It reduces stress and loneliness, music does. It improves memory, believe it or not. Well, we can believe that. I mean, we put the books of the Bible to a melody so that kids can learn it. Or other Bible facts. We do that with music or song. Music is used to help Alzheimer's patients with their memory. And it helps all of us with our memory in daily life. I mean, right now, if I was to give you a little jingle, it will bring up a certain thought, a certain product that jingle is associated with. So we understand what it does. It improves our mood. Stores found out that without music, people are uncomfortable shopping. They have to have certain things playing to affect their mood and to affect their buying experience. I mean, it's the same thing with restaurants. I mean, I hear Mexican music, my mouth waters. I am trained to the core. I'm not kidding. You play Mexican music right now, I'll start salivating. It's just, I don't know what it is. But you have to have that on when you go to the Mexican restaurant. You have to have that music playing to make a difference. And all of this just illustrates the fact that music is who we are. And because of that, God has always used music on certain occasions. You can go back and read when the ark was being brought back to Jerusalem, David and the people were playing music. It was part of the celebration, 1 Chronicles 15. When the temple was dedicated to the Lord, we see that Solomon and all them used music to set the mood and to note the occasion in 2 Chronicles chapter 7. Or when the wall was dedicated after captivity, we see in Nehemiah 12, verse 27, music was part of that moment. Music is who we are, and God knows that. He's used music on many occasions to celebrate certain thoughts. 1 Chronicles 25, it was very important to have music in the Old Testament worship. In fact, the priest had the job, certain priests did, especially Asaph and his descendants, had the job of composing and playing music for their worship services at the temple. So God knows how this affects us, and He's commissioned it on occasion to be part of our worship or their worship service back then, and how He uses a certain type of music even today. But I think it's worth noting in 2 Chronicles 29, when Hezekiah was leading the people back to God, notice on this occasion that they brought in music the way God wanted it practiced back then, but notice the effect it had on the people. In 2 Chronicles chapter 29 and verse 25, beginning, speaking of Hezekiah the king, and again, they're restoring worship that had been missing among these people. And it says in verse 25, he stationed the Levites in the house of the Lord with cymbals, with stringed instruments, and with harps, according to the commandment of David, of Gad the king's seer, and of Nathan the prophet, for thus was the commandment of the Lord by his prophets. Now notice that. Instrumental music was part of their worship service, but notice God commanded it, and that he gave that job to the Levites. They were the ones who would play in worship. And the Levites, in verse 26, stood with the instruments of David, and the priests with the trumpets. Then Hezekiah commanded them to offer the burnt offering on the altar. And when the burnt offering began, the song of the Lord also began with the trumpet and with the instruments of David, king of Israel. So all the assembly worshiped. The singers sang, the trumpeters sounded. All this continued until the burnt offering was finished. And when they had finished offering, the king and all who were present with him bowed and worshipped. Moreover, King Hezekiah and the leaders commanded the Levites to sing praise to the Lord with the words of David and of Asaph the seer. So they sang praises with gladness, and they bowed their heads and worshiped. So when I read that, it just, once again, it reinforces the point that God knows that music affects us. And he was requiring it back then. It was a requirement of worship. And of course, he gave certain restrictions and certain regulations, I should say, on how to do that. And so we see that. Now, because of all this, I believe it's also worth noting that we have to be careful to the type of music we listen to because of the impact, because of all the things we just said. That the things we listen to define our thoughts and our heart. And Jesus said the reason that's so important is because we struggle with sin because of what's in our heart. You know, the things that we keep struggling to overcome. Well, the problem is we keep putting it in our heart. Our heart is trained with those things, with those thoughts. And so Jesus says it's out of the heart that proceed evil thoughts and murderers and adulterers and fornication, so on and so forth, and blasphemies. It's out of the heart. And so when we struggle with these things, it's because of the stuff we've been feeding our mind one way or another. And music hasn't a part of that. Music has a way of training our mind and influencing our thoughts. And because of that, we have to be very, very careful to what we listen to. Jesus said it this way in Matthew chapter 5, that the way you think is the way you're going to live. And so your heart has to be pure. The light has to be pure in your mind. And he says in Matthew chapter 5, verses 22 and 23, and encouraging us to be wise, he says, I say to you, no, that's not it. It's Matthew. That's the right reference up there, but I think, let's see here. It's Matthew 6 in the Bible. All right, Matthew chapter 6, 22 and 23. It says, the lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? And he's just simply talking about our heart, our mind, our thoughts. If they're dark, our whole life is going to be dark because our heart influences how we live. And I simply make that point because music affects your heart. There are things that we can listen to without even realizing it that are training our thinking. And as a result, it's having an impact on how we live. And if we are given to certain curse words or certain filthy lucre, you don't ever hear too much about that, filthy lucre, but coarse jesting. But there is such a thing as being vile and dirty in your jokes and humor and in the way you interact with other people. I think you know what I'm talking about. There are certain people that's just part of them. And cursing, of course, can be a part of somebody's language without them even realizing it because they've just been trained. Well, music affects that. Music affects how we think. And we can be saying things that we don't even realize it. I hope you can appreciate this, but many years ago, you remember that song by Elvis, Viva Las Vegas? Viva Las Vegas. You know what I'm talking about. Well, the older people do. And so There's a medical, a prescription company that took that song and advertised a certain product, and there was Viva Viagra. Okay, I'm gonna leave it at that. But anyway, that's what they were. It was to that tune. Okay, it was on television a lot of commercials. Well, the only reason I share that with you is because we were in the store one day, and McCord was young. He was less than 10. He was a young boy, and he's an aisle over, and I hear him singing that song. Viva, I was like, and I'm like, oh, and I could hear that young voice just, Viva blank. I was like, son, I come up, son, what are you doing? He goes, what? I said, what are you saying? He goes, what are you talking about? I said, you don't need to be singing that song. He didn't know what he was singing. But yeah, I mean, it was terrifying. But the only reason he was singing is because he had heard it on the television. I tell Steph, don't listen to that stuff, don't watch those shows, but she just kept watching them. And no, he didn't know. He didn't know. He was just repeating that jingle that he had heard. But I tell you that because that illustrates what music can do. There are certain songs you can't listen to, or you can't listen to without muting, because of the thoughts it puts in our heart. And why is that important? Well, God teaches us we have to be careful with what we say. And we're responsible for what we say. In Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 29, let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the hearers. And so, let us be mindful of music. Music's all around us. And again, it's a good thing. It can be a very good thing. But we have to be very cautious to what we're putting in our heart, putting in our mind. Well, let me say this other thought then, in light of this. And that is, yeah, music affects us. And yes, we have to be careful. But because of all this, I believe that's one reason why God makes it a part of worship. Because He knows what impact it has on us and how it can influence us for the good. We just sang to God. We did. We just addressed these thoughts to God through song as we were singing to one another. And I tell you, one thing that's really good about this church is some good singing. Now, this building helps out. It sounds really good in here. But there's some good singing here. But we're worshiping God in our songs. And we have to always remember that He is a God who loves music too. And He loves to hear us sing. And He loves to hear us sing from the heart and according to His will. I don't know who wrote this, but I came across this, and I thought it was pretty good. As the author and creator of both our body and spirit, He provided a prescription for our health that's readily accessible to all, regardless of the era in which we live or how easy it is to visit a doctor. Even when there's no way to listen, we can sing to God in the midst of our joys and struggles, making music of our own. And that's a good thought. God wants us to sing. He does. He wants us to sing, not only with one another, but sing to Him. He wants us to be people who sing. And so it's been a part of New Testament worship since Christianity began. So many verses in the Bible, especially the New Testament, teach us the importance of singing in worship. Romans 15 and verse 9, I will sing to your name. 1 Corinthians 14:15, I will sing with spirit and the understanding. Singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord. Ephesians 5:19, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord. Colossians 3:16, I will sing Christ's praise in the congregation. James 5, this one is very encouraging as well, where it teaches us that we are to sing to the Lord when we're happy. Is anyone among you suffering? Let him pray. Is anyone among you cheerful? Let him sing psalms. Now we hear good reminders from time to time about the importance of turning to God in prayer. We do need to be people who pray, to not let anxiety overwhelm us, but to pray. But how often do we sing? How often do we pause throughout the day to sing to God, to praise Him, and to thank Him for what He's given, and to like was stated in our prayer a while ago, to thank Him for all that He's shared with us. God wants to hear from us, and He wants us to sing it to Him from time to time. But what we note about song worship today is that it is dramatically different than what He used to do with the Israelites. Now, we noted a while ago that the Levites were the ones who were to play as they gathered for public worship. But what we see is God is teaching us to do something different. And what we know about our God is that when people worship the way He wants them to, the way He's instructed them to, it brings Him great joy. In fact, this whole lesson started out with King Saul getting in trouble because he did not do God's will, and God was insulted by that. Well, anytime we do God's will, it brings Him joy. Even when Noah came out of the ark and they worshiped, he worshiped, and he made this animal sacrifice the way God wanted back then. And in Genesis chapter 8 it says that the Lord smelled a soothing aroma. And the Lord said in His heart, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake. So on and so forth. But why did that sacrifice smell so good to God? Is it saying that God likes barbecue? Is that the point of that? The thing that smelled so good to God was that now there were people on the earth doing His will. And that's what that sacrifice reminded Him of. It reminded Him that there are people who know Him and want to do His will and want to give Him the honor He deserves. Now here's the point. When you and I sing, I believe it does the same thing to Him. It's a sweet, soothing aroma. Music soothes His soul, if you will. It soothes Him because it reminds Him there are people in this world who love Him, who believe in Him, and who are willing to do His will. That's the kind of worshiper God has always looked for. Not somebody who wants to do it their way and try to manipulate it as much as possible, but rather He's always looked for people who are content to do it the way He wants and give Him the glory He deserves. That's what Jesus said in John chapter 4. When He says that in verses 23 and 24, that the hour is coming and now is when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such to worship Him. God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship in spirit and truth. So what's that mean? Spirit and truth. It means we don't simply just go through the motions without thinking about it. We mean what we say what we mean. It's from the heart. We're not and in light of this, just simply singing songs. And so we sing with our spirit. That's a sweet smelling aroma to God when people offer Him their heart. But we do it according to His will. And that, of course, is why Noah's sacrifice smelled so good to God, because he was doing it the way God wanted done, when so many before did not. And so when we sing with the Spirit and we sing according to the truth, God is very well pleased, because He too loves music, especially from those who are offering it the way He wants. And that's why we see in 1 Corinthians 14 and verse 15 that we are people who are mindful of everything we say in worship. Every word we think or say in our prayers, or in our teaching, or in our singing, every word is to be with intent and meaning and according to God's will. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 14 and verse 15, what is the conclusion? Then I will pray with the Spirit. Again, we're praying with our heart. I will pray with the Spirit. I will also pray with understanding. I will sing with the Spirit, and I will also sing with understanding. We have to remember that. As much as we love a certain melody or a certain tune and how it makes us feel, it's really not truly beneficial until we offer it to the Lord from all of our heart, with understanding and with intent and with purpose. And so because of that, because we're committed to singing the way He wants us to, especially in worship, we do things differently than they did in the old. What we see in the old is that when God wanted mechanical instrument in public worship, He taught people how to do it. He told the Levites, you play. It's your job. And he assigned that to them. And yet, when we see in the New Testament, the great difference is you don't have that. God is not teaching anybody in the New Testament to play a mechanical instrument. But over and over and over, what we see is people being told to sing. And so you don't have one reference whatsoever to instrumental music, if you will, or mechanical instrumental music in New Testament worship. I've always thought this was so powerful. The term a cappella. Now, even the average person knows that the term a cappella means to sing just with the voice, that there's no mechanical instrument helping out. Everybody knows that. But the Latin term a cappella means in the manner of the chapel or in manner of the church. In other words, the first Christians were known for singing without mechanical instruments. And they were so well known for that that an entire word was created to describe them. So that whenever you sang without a mechanical instrument, you're doing like the people did in church. That's how it started out. That's how the New Testament introduced song worship to the world. It's with the voice and with the heart. And that's all we see in the New Testament. And so even this word reflects that. That when you sing a cappella, you're singing like the first Christians did in church. And really, for most of church history, if you will, it was unheard of to have instrumental music. This is fairly new in the development of church history, believe it or not. Even though it's so common in our world, you could just roll back just a few centuries and it was uncommon. People just did not do this in the majority like they do now. And there are so many references to prove this. Clement of Alexandria in 195 said, "We no longer employ the ancient psaltery, trumpet, timbrel, and flute." So even they were acknowledging that it was not part of New Testament worship. McClintock and Strong's Encyclopedia says Pope Vitalian in AD 606 was the first to introduce organs into churches. And so we see, again, this was just not part of the mainstream worship. I've always thought that this was good as well. John Calvin, this is in the 1500s. Musical instruments in celebrating the praises of God would be no more suitable than the burning of incense, the lighting of lamps, and the restoration of the other shadows of the law. You understand that? That if we were to lift up everybody and take us all back, just even to the 1500s, and you went to a worship service for the Lord, everybody's singing. Most services had singing. You didn't have instrumental music like we have today. And what's really remarkable is that those who have practiced this for so many years are now seeing the corruption of it and how there's a performance aspect to it. And then there's this effort to try and get back to just simply singing to the Lord. Believe it or not, that's appealing to certain people, which is a good thing. But regardless of if it's appealing to other people, it appeals to God. He wants us to sing and make melody where? In our heart to the Lord is what he teaches us. Charles Spurgeon, and this is even in the 1800s. Now, he was like the Billy Graham of his day. He was the Joel Osteen of his day. This guy had a major following. And yet even he opposed instrumental music. I would as soon pray to God with machinery as to sing to God with machinery. And again, this doesn't have any bearing on proving that we should not do this in worship, but it simply reinforces the truth. The New Testament does not teach us to practice mechanical instrument in worship like God did teach the Jews to do it. We're under a different law. And again, I repeat, whenever he wants this done, he tells you how to do it. But instead, he teaches us to sing and make melody where? In our heart. Sing and make melody where? In your heart. Sing and make melody on a harp or on a stringed instrument or on a drum or whatever. No. Sing and make melody where, God? I want you to sing and make melody in your heart, in your heart, in your heart, making melody in your heart to the Lord. He couldn't really be more clear than that in teaching us what to do in worship. So anyway, I share these thoughts with us to show that we are indeed, we're still using music to worship God. He still wants it because it's part of who we are. Music affects us, but He simply teaches us to do it the way He wants in singing to the Lord. And so may God help us in understanding that. So I share these thoughts with us. It's a broad subject, I know, but certainly we can see we need to pay attention. Pay attention to what we're listening to, what we are encouraging people to listen to, and how our words are affecting other people, and whether or not our words have been influenced by the things we've watched and read and listened to. And then, of course, to use this aspect to worship God. Thank you for listening very patiently. And if you're here, you're not a child of God, we're going to sing to encourage you to respond to God. We're going to sing to God, but we're going to sing to you to persuade you to obey the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so if you're ready to do that, all things are ready to help you. Or if you don't understand that, we ask you for an opportunity. If you're ready to respond to God, please come to Him as we stand and sing.